14 dogs, 1 girl, and a secret buried in ashes. What they found in that barn defied every rule and rewrote what we call family. In a forgotten corner of Ashford Hill stood a barn no one visited except the man they called Graham the Hermit and the 14 German shepherds that lived with him. They were supposed to be dangerous, untouchable, a threat to the town. But when social workers tried to take them away, something happened. A girl walked through the gate, silent, alone, and the dogs moved, like soldiers returning to their commander. What no one knew was that this girl, Ellie, had once lived in the shadow of fire, that her voice had been burned away by the same wreckage that left Graham haunted. But the truth didn't disappear. It waited, in wagging tails, in silent drills, in a bond stronger than blood. This is not just a story about a girl and her dogs. It's about redemption, about a promise that crossed time, trauma, and species. And when the final letter is opened, you'll understand why the world needs more stories like this one. The morning air on Ashford Hill was the kind that carried silence like a memory cold, still, and waiting to be disturbed. The mist had settled low over the pine-covered slopes, curling around fence posts and creeping through the cracks in the wooden boards of the old barn. It was the kind of dawn that felt half asleep, suspended between worlds. And in the middle of it all, moving slowly through the thick hush, was a man in a worn canvas jacket, coffee mug in hand, flanked by 14 German shepherds who walked not behind him but beside him, as if they were equals. Graham Cole didn't talk much, not to people at least, but here, among his dogs, every glance had weight, every breath meant something. He stepped over a frosty patch of gravel, boots crunching softly, and lifted his face toward the faint glow breaking over the hills. Pale orange cracked through the horizon like embers flickering at the edge of a dying fire. He blinked once, then sipped his coffee. Bitter, too strong, just how he liked it. One by one, the dogs spread out across the yard, stretching limbs, sniffing earth, rolling shoulders like athletes warming up before a silent ballet. Apollo trotted toward the training barrels. Athena padded over to the trough. Zeus, oldest, largest, and proudest, sat close to Graham, eyes narrowed as if reading the wind. There had been a time when Graham started his mornings to the sound of sirens, when fire danced in alleyways and he carried men heavier than he was out of collapsing buildings. There had been a time when his house was filled with laughter, his wife's humming in the kitchen, Kuno's claws clicking over hardwood floors. There had been a time, but time had a way of burning through things. Graham set the mug down on a fence post and rubbed the scar above his eyebrow, the one that pulsed every winter like a warning. Kuno had died in his arms. 14 years of service. One final call. A collapsing roof, smoke so thick it tasted like copper. The vet said the cancer had been silent, too far gone by the time they found it, like fire behind drywall. And his wife, she was already ashes. He didn't cry when it happened. Not at the funeral, not even when he closed their bedroom door and never opened it again. But when the house grew too quiet and the nights too long, he'd walked into the local kill shelter and asked the staff if they had one like Kuno. That was how it began. First came Max, then Luna, then Thor and Shadow and the rest, all labeled aggressive, unstable, damaged. Dogs no one wanted. Dogs Graham understood. Over time, his barn became a heated haven, his field a training ground, his silence a language they learned to trust. People in town said he was obsessed, that he was hoarding danger, but they didn't know what it was like to wake up screaming and have a muzzle pressed gently to your chest. They didn't know what it meant to be saved by something that couldn't speak. He did. "Zeus," Graham said quietly. The dog perked up. "You keep the line straight today, you hear me?" The old shepherd gave a low, gruff bark. Graham gave a faint smile. It didn't reach his eyes. He moved toward the barn, running his fingers along the fence as he passed. The wood was cold and damp with dew. His breath fogged before him. Inside, he unlocked the feed room, dished out the morning rations, strict order, no competition, and brought the bowls out one by one. The dogs waited in formation, each to their mark. A nod was all it took. No shouting, no whistles, just a nod. Discipline built from months of repetition and trust. As they ate, Graham leaned against the post, the weight in his bones a little heavier than yesterday. His doctor had said to take it easy, said there were signs, shadows on the scan, but Graham had never been good at listening. He was better with actions, always had been. A gust of wind cut across the field, rustling the pines and carrying with it something else, something off. Not the snap of a twig or the cry of a bird. This sound was softer, deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. Graham stood up straighter. The dogs paused, a collective stillness falling over them like instinct. Zeus growled low in his throat. "Hold," Graham said firmly. They obeyed. He stepped forward, cautious, senses honed like an old fireman smelling smoke before seeing flame. Rounding the edge of the barn, his eyes locked onto something he didn't expect to find on his property, especially not at this hour. A small figure, still as a statue, barefoot in the grass. It was a sound barely louder than a breath, but it stopped Graham Cole cold. He had just finished locking the feed room when it came again, a whisper of movement, not quite wind, not quite wildlife. It was intentional, measured, a dry leaf folding under the weight of something human. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He moved without rushing, as one who's been through worse, and lived to tell no one. Past the trough, around the corner of the barn, eyes scanning for intruders, his instinct still that of a man trained to step into danger when others ran from it. But nothing had prepared him for what he saw. There, in the very heart of the training field, stood a girl, small, unmoving, barefoot in the grass. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her frame was slight, her skin pale, and her dark blonde hair hung in tangled strands across her face. A faded gray sweatshirt hung past her wrists. She looked like she had wandered out of a dream or a memory that didn't belong to him. She wasn't crying, wasn't trembling. She was just still. But what stole Graham's breath wasn't her presence. It was what surrounded her. All 14 of his dogs, his soldiers, his pack, his family stood in a perfect circle around her, heads low, ears forward, bodies tense, not with aggression, but with alertness. They weren't threatening. They were guarding. Graham's feet rooted to the earth, his voice caught behind his ribs. Zeus was there, closest to the girl, his massive chest rising and falling like a storm waiting to pass. Graham had seen this dog hold his ground against armed intruders, had seen him take down a man twice his size without hesitation. And now Zeus stepped forward, slowly, purposefully, and bowed his great head beneath the girl's outstretched hand. She hadn't moved until that moment, but now her arm lifted, trembling slightly, but sure. Her fingers hovered in the air, palm open, vulnerable. And the fiercest of his pack surrendered to her touch, like a knight kneeling before a silent queen. Graham's heart kicked hard against his ribs. One by one the others followed. Apollo sat, tail thumping once. Luna tilted her head, whining softly before settling on her haunches. Shadow lay down at full length, chin on paws, eyes fixed outward. Within seconds, the circle transformed. Not a perimeter of war, but of reverence. The girl stood in the center like the still point of a turning world. Graham didn't dare speak. The weight of the moment felt holy. Her eyes, large, gray-green, too old for her face, met his across the field. There was no fear in them, no demand, just something ancient and quiet. Like she'd seen the storm and decided to become the eye of it. He tried to remember if he'd ever seen her before. Maybe once, through a dusty kitchen window. The house across the property line, the one the Millers had moved into months ago after the accident. He hadn't asked. He never did. People in town whispered about it, how the granddaughter had survived and hadn't spoken a word since, not even in sleep. He took a half-step forward. Zeus flicked an ear. "Easy," Graham muttered under his breath, unsure whether he was speaking to himself or the dogs. He crouched slowly, making himself smaller, safer. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. Her hand, still hovering above Zeus's head, finally made contact, fingers resting lightly on the dense black fur between his ears. Zeus closed his eyes, just for a moment. Something deep in Graham's chest cracked then. A shift, not unlike pressure before a fire flashover. Something was changing, and he didn't understand it yet, but he felt it down in his bones. He stood again, cautiously, hands by his sides. "Ellie," he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a memory of a name he'd overheard at the grocery store, maybe. A name tied to tragedy. A name that sounded both like a prayer and a wound. She didn't reply, didn't blink, just stood in the circle of dogs, utterly calm. The moment stretched out between them, soft as breath. And then the front door of the neighboring house burst open. "Ellie!" Two figures, Robert and Martha Miller, came running across the field. Martha's hands were shaking as she clutched her coat tighter around her. Robert was already halfway into the yard, shouting her name again, panic in every syllable. The spell broke. The dogs turned as one, posture unchanged, still protective, but they didn't move. "Stay back!" Graham called out, louder than he intended. Robert froze, confused, eyeing the wall of shepherds standing between him and his granddaughter. "It's okay," Graham said, stepping into the space between them. "She's fine. They're not going to hurt her." "She doesn't talk," Martha whispered, breathless. She doesn't let anyone." Graham looked back toward the girl. Ellie lowered her arm. The dogs, as if on cue, stepped aside, creating a path. She walked through them without hesitation, her gaze never leaving Graham's face until the very last step. Robert swept her into his arms, trembling. She didn't resist, but she didn't respond either. Her face was blank, distant, somewhere else entirely. As they turned to go, Ellie looked back over her shoulder. Not at the barn, not at the field, at the dogs, and at him. The screen door slammed shut behind them, but Graham didn't move. He stood in the same spot, boots sunk an inch into the soft earth, his breath visible in the cool air like smoke from a slow-burning ember. Ellie had vanished behind the tree line, nestled in the arms of her grandfather. Not a word, not a cry, just the same haunting silence that had followed her into the circle, and now seemed to linger like an echo. Zeus sat at Graham's side, unmoving. The other dogs drifted back to their posts one by one, like soldiers returning from some unspeakable ritual. No barking, no tension, just a quiet shift, as if something ancient had stirred in their blood and then gone dormant again. Graham reached out and rested a hand on Zeus's head. What the hell just happened? The old shepherd didn't answer, just closed his eyes and leaned into the touch. Across the field, the light in the miller's kitchen flicked on. A shadow Martha maybe moved past the window, frantic and fast, pulling blankets from the couch. Graham could picture the inside of that house even though he hadn't stepped foot in it. He imagined the tension in their voices, the way they'd talk around the question they couldn't answer. How did she get past us? Why the dogs? And under it all, that fear, not of what Ellie had done, but of what she might be becoming. He exhaled slowly, chest tight. Something in his gut had shifted, knotted. Not unease, exactly. More like a pressure he didn't yet have words for. Like smoke curling from a wall before you knew the fire was behind it. The girl didn't scream, didn't panic. Those dogs, trained, reactive, tested beyond measure, had surrounded her like she belonged to them, or maybe like she'd summoned them. No child should move like that, should stand so still in the presence of 14 working German shepherds. Graham had seen seasoned officers flinch under the weight of those eyes, but not her. She hadn't flinched once. He walked back toward the barn, hands in his pockets, boots heavy with morning dew. The coffee on the fence post had gone cold. He didn't bother picking it up. Inside, the scent of cedar shavings and dried hay wrapped around him like memory. He unlatched the kennel gate, not that the dogs needed it, and gave a soft whistle. They returned in pairs, falling into routine like a lullaby. He moved through feeding, grooming, water checks, muscle memory. But his mind wasn't in it. It was somewhere in that circle, somewhere between Zeus's bowed head and that tiny outstretched hand. By late afternoon, the mist had burned off, and the hills were bathed in gold. Graham sat on the back porch with a worn photo in his hand, him and Kuno, years ago, taken after a fire on Maple Ridge. They both looked younger, sharper. The eyes in the photo didn't match the ones he had now. He tucked it back into his coat pocket and rubbed his chest where the tightness had started creeping again. Not pain, just weight. Evening came early that time of year. Shadows fell long and low. The pines whispered in the wind, and the dogs grew restless in their pens. Then Luna whined. It wasn't the high-pitched bark she gave when she saw a squirrel or the warning growl for a passing car. This was softer, sharper, a question more than a sound. Graham followed her gaze. The fence line. She sat facing it, ears perked, tail rigid. Apollo joined her, pacing back and forth along the boundary, one paw, then another, like he was tracking something invisible. Graham rose and stepped off the porch. "Anyone out there?" he called softly, scanning the darkening woods. Nothing, but still, Luna waited. It wasn't unusual for her to be alert. She was a sentinel by nature. But this was different. There was expectation in her stillness, as if she'd been promised something that hadn't arrived. Graham stood beside her for a long while. Just him, the dogs, and the hush of early night. No Ellie, no footsteps, no echo of that eerie morning miracle, just the rustle of wind and the unshakable sense that the center of something had shifted. He just didn't know how or why. He knelt beside Luna, placed a hand on her neck. "You miss her already?" he asked softly. She didn't respond. But she didn't move either. And in the way of creatures who had long since given up on language, Graham understood. He stared past the fence line into the dark. the space between the trees now holding something more than air. The fluorescent lights inside Ashford's town hall flickered like a heartbeat too nervous to settle. The building, once a modest high school cafeteria, now served as the venue for every town meeting, potluck, and Sunday pancake fundraiser the residents could cram into its dated walls. But tonight, the folding chairs were packed tighter than usual, and no one was smiling. The air was thick with heat, and something heavier, unease. Mayor Walter Collier adjusted his tie for the third time as he stood behind the podium, flanked by 2 council members and a worn American flag that had seen better days. His graying mustache twitched every time he cleared his throat, which he had now done twice in under a minute. "We'll begin shortly," he said, voice calm but frayed. The murmur of voices tapered into a hush as Rachel Simmons rose from her seat in the second row. Even standing, she barely reached 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the sharpness of someone used to being heard. Her lemon-yellow blouse clashed with the grim expressions around her. She turned to face the room, jaw set like concrete. "I think we all know why we're here," she began, no need for pleasantries. "It's about the dogs." A few heads nodded, a few shoulders tensed. Graham Cole sat near the back, alone, arms crossed over his chest, a trucker's cap pulled low over his eyes. He said nothing. Didn't need to. His very presence, quiet and steady, pulled the room's attention like gravity. Rachel gestured toward the mayor without turning her back on the crowd. 14, she said, as if the number itself was criminal. 14 large-breed, high-drive German shepherds on one property, behind one fence, less than 100 yards from a school bus stop. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Let's be honest," she continued. "This isn't a kennel. It's a liability." Mayor Collier finally stepped forward. "Thank you, Rachel. As you all know, the council has received multiple written concerns: safety, noise, health risk." Someone near the wall muttered, "Ain't no noise." But Collier pressed on. "We've reviewed the current municipal codes and, after consultation with legal, are proposing a residential ordinance limiting private ownership to 3 dogs per household. Current owners would have 90 days to comply." The silence that followed was suffocating. 3 dogs, from 14 to 3. Graham didn't move. His face was unreadable, but his fingers tapped rhythmically against his elbow, an old firefighting habit. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Focus over fear. Stay calm in the burn. Janet Hargrove, manager of the local animal shelter, raised a tentative hand. "If I may, Graham's dogs are all fixed, vaccinated, chipped. They're trained. I've seen his facility. It's cleaner than most clinics." "That may be true," Rachel snapped. "But training doesn't erase instinct. And training doesn't matter when the power goes out and a gate fails. What happens when a child wanders too close?" Graham's fingers stopped tapping. "What happens when someone gets hurt?" Rachel continued, her voice rising. "Who's liable then? Because the town sure as hell will be." Collier glanced at Graham, then back at the crowd. "The ordinance is not aimed at any individual. It's about precedent, risk. We must protect our community." "And what about protecting the people who are doing things right?" Janet asked, her voice firmer now. "Who's going to take in 11 trained shepherds? We barely have resources for 3 mutts a week. You going to sign up for that, Rachel?" Rachel folded her arms but said nothing. The silence stretched again. Graham stood slowly. Every eye in the room turned toward him, but he didn't speak. He walked to the center aisle, his boots heavy against the floor, and stopped just for a moment beneath the flickering light. Then he turned around and left. No words, no defense, just a quiet exit that somehow said more than anything he could have spoken. Out in the cool night, the air felt thinner, sharper. He walked to his truck but didn't get in, just leaned against it, jaw tight. His hands trembled slightly more from fury than fear, but he buried them in his jacket pockets. Through the town hall window, the argument continued. Inside that room, they were counting votes. Out here, he was counting losses. He took a deep breath, coughed once, then twice, a deep, rasping sound that scratched at his ribs. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and stared toward the tree line, toward home, where 14 pairs of eyes were probably waiting at the fence, listening, sensing something he didn't want to say out loud. The frost had returned overnight, dusting the edges of fence rails and painting the dry grass in silvery whispers. Dawn had barely broken, but Ellie Miller was already outside barefoot again, as if cold didn't matter to her anymore. She stood just beyond the fence line that bordered Graham's property, where the pine trees thinned out into a wide clearing and the barn cast long shadows across the training yard. Her small hands curled around the weathered wood slats, chin resting on the top rail. The sleeves of her too-big hoodie dangled past her fingers. The wind blew strands of hair across her face, but she didn't move to fix them. 14 German shepherds moved through the field, one by one, in slow motion like dancers, rehearsing a piece that only they knew. No commands, no leashes, just instinct and presence. They rotated between stations, jumping over logs, weaving through barrels, pausing at attention. Even at rest, there was something orderly in how they existed together, bound not by fear, but understanding. Ellie watched without blinking. She didn't smile, didn't fidget. She simply absorbed. From the barn doorway, Graham saw her. He didn't move to approach. Not yet. Just leaned his shoulder against the frame, arms crossed, breathing steam into the chilled air. She'd been doing this almost every morning for the past 2 weeks, always early, always silent. Some kids kicked fences. Some shouted commands they didn't understand. Ellie didn't do either. She simply watched. But there was something deeper in that gaze, measured, patient, like she was studying not just movement, but meaning. He remembered the first time he saw her. It had been back in early September, right after the Millers moved in. Ellie's grandparents, Robert and Martha. Kind people, worn by grief. Kindness often comes from people who know what it costs. He'd been brushing Athena near the fence when he caught movement from the corner of his eye. There, behind a curtain on the second floor of the old farmhouse, a pale face peeked out, eyes wide and haunted, half hidden behind yellowing fabric. Not peering, not spying, just present. As if she were afraid she didn't really exist unless she saw the world proving itself. For a week, she stayed at the window. Then came the bridge. It was Martha who told him quietly, one day at the hardware store. Voice tight, words rationed. "It was black ice," she said. "December last year. Her parents' car slid through the guardrail, into the ravine." She'd spoken it like a confession, like saying it out loud meant owning some unspeakable portion of the weight. "They didn't make it," she added after a long pause. "Ellie did." Graham remembered nodding slowly, unsure what one says in the face of that kind of math. 1 child spared, 2 lives lost, a balance that could never feel fair. She hasn't said a word since. He never pried, never asked how or why or what Ellie had seen in those last moments before impact. Some things were stitched into the silence too deep to be spoken. But now she was here, again, watching, learning, And the dogs, who didn't take to strangers, who often barked at anything unfamiliar, watched her back without a sound. Graham looked down at Luna, who just padded up to stand beside him. Her ears twitched. She tilted her head toward the fence, then looked up at him like she was waiting for an answer he didn't have. "Yeah," he murmured. "I see her too." Ellie's eyes never left the field. Even when Graham stepped forward, even when his boots crunched over gravel and frost. He stopped a few feet from the fence, just far enough to let her feel the space between them. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just nodded. That was enough. Ellie's eyes dropped for a second acknowledgement, maybe, then returned to the dogs. A beat passed. Then she lifted her hand slowly, carefully. Not a wave, a gesture. Her palm flattened, hovered, then dipped, like the signal Graham used when bringing a dog to a gentle sit. Apollo, the youngest of the pack, happened to be facing her. And he obeyed. Graham's breath caught. Just for a moment, Ellie blinked, lowered her hand, and turned away. She disappeared into the trees like she had never been there at all. But Graham stood for a while longer, watching the spot where she'd stood, feeling something shift, not loud, not sudden, but real, like a shadow moving across memory. The cemetery sat on a low rise just past the old church at Hollow Creek Road, where the map ended and memory began. It was the kind of place you could miss if you blinked too long. Iron gate rusted through in one hinge, grass creeping up over headstones like time itself was trying to forget. Graham pulled the truck off to the side, shut the engine, and let the silence settle in. He walked the path like he always did. Quiet boots, stiff shoulder, hands tucked in the weathered canvas jacket Sarah once patched at the elbow. The air smelled like cedar and faint smoke from someone's chimney down in town. It was cold, but not bitter. The kind of cold that made grief sting sharper, like breath pulled through cracked lips. He passed the Rowans, the Bennetts, the Dixon boys lost in 43. And then, near the edge where the slope began to fall into the valley, he saw them. 2 markers. Simple. Side by side. One granite headstone etched with her name. Sarah Lynn Connolly, beloved wife. Brave soul. 1978-2015. The other, a smaller stone beneath a bronze plaque. Kuno K-9 officer. Loyal beyond life. Graham knelt down between them. Gravel bit into his knee, but he didn't move. He slid off his glove, fingertips tracing the grooves in Sarah's name like reading Braille for the blind heart. He didn't speak. He never did here. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded paper creased 4 times, corners softened by touch. He'd written it the night before, sometime after the dogs had gone still and the stars had begun their slow spin above the barn. His handwriting was uneven now. Years of joint damage made it harder, but the words came like breath. He placed the letter under a smooth river stone at the base of Sarah's grave. It read, "I don't know what's happening here, but I think it matters. There's a girl. She doesn't speak, but the dogs, they listen to her like she's written in their bones. I haven't felt this kind of quiet in a long time, not the kind that hurts. Something's waking up. I wish you were here to see it. Maybe you do." He stayed there for a while, fingers resting on Kuno's plaque. Kuno had taken the bullet meant for him. Downtown call, bad lead, worse outcome. Graham still remembered the sound, a kind of crack that split the world. Kuno didn't even hesitate, didn't flinch, just moved. There were things a man couldn't forget. But this strange unfolding with Ellie, was something he didn't want to forget. He stood slowly, joints creaking, and gave the stone a parting press, an old habit, like saying, "See you soon," without breaking. As he turned to leave, a gust of wind pushed through the trees, rattling leaves like whispers. That night, long after dusk had swallowed the fields and the dogs had settled into their usual rhythms, Graham heard a low growl from outside the window. Not aggressive, just alert. The kind of sound that meant, something's here, but it's not danger. He stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, sweeping the beam across the yard. The barn loomed to the left, fence lines to the right, shadows layered over more shadows. Then he saw her, Ellie, closer than ever. She stood just inside the boundary now, not at the far fence, but at the wooden arch near the training ring, her feet pressed into frost-glazed grass. No coat, just that same threadbare hoodie, sleeves still too long, hands hidden. Her face was lit faintly by the glow from the porch lantern pale, ghost-like, almost translucent against the dark. And around her again stood the dogs. Luna, Apollo, Brutus, Sage, every one of them, forming not a wall, but a watch. Their bodies still, their eyes fixed on Graham, waiting. She didn't run, didn't flinch when his boots hit the stairs. He approached slowly, breath fogging in the air between them. He stopped a good 10 feet away. "You cold?" he asked gently, voice low, not expecting an answer. Ellie blinked. Then something remarkable happened. She lifted her hand palm flat and placed it gently on Luna's back. The dog leaned into the touch without hesitation. No command needed, just presence. Graham felt something shift again in that quiet. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. He didn't push her, didn't ask her why she was there or how she got out. He just said, "Come on inside. I'll make cocoa." Ellie looked up at him. Then, without a word, turned and walked toward the house, Luna padding beside her like a sentinel. The others followed. Not because they were told, because something in them recognized something in her. And so did he. The sun rose slow over Ashford that morning, casting long amber rays across the frost-laced field behind Graham's barn. Everything felt quieter than usual, not empty, but suspended, like the world was holding its breath. Graham stood near the training circle with a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a folded towel in the other. His breath came in thick puffs, mingling with the morning air. Behind him, the dogs stirred in their kennels, but none barked. Not since she had arrived. Ellie sat on the edge of the wooden platform, legs dangling above the damp ground. She wore a navy blue coat someone had left on the church donation bench. Too big, sleeves swallowing her hands, but she didn't seem to mind. She was watching Apollo, not nervously, not like a child afraid of sharp teeth, but reverently, as if she saw something no one else did. Graham had seen that kind of look before on soldiers visiting Arlington, on the face of a mother seeing her son's service dog return alone. It wasn't fear. It was memory, wrapped in skin too young to carry it. "You ready to try?" Graham asked quietly, approaching her. Ellie didn't nod, but her shoulders squared a little. That was answer enough. Apollo, the sable-coated sentinel with a gaze that could freeze a man mid-stride, stood at attention just 10 feet away. His ears were perked, head tilted, not aggressive, just curious. Graham crouched beside Ellie and spoke gently, like explaining something sacred. "Apollo's the youngest of the veterans. Iraq. 3 tours, lost his partner to an IED. He doesn't warm easy, but he's watching you." Ellie's eyes flicked to Graham, then back to Apollo. She didn't flinch. Graham held out the towel. "This has his scent on it. He used it when we trained on scent recall. Let him smell you with this. Just hold it out. No sudden moves." Her fingers, small, delicate, still shaking, just slightly took the towel. Apollo stepped forward, deliberate, nose twitching, one step, then another. Then he stopped right in front of her. She held the towel out. Apollo sniffed. Then, miraculously, he sat, still, calm, present. Graham felt his chest tighten in a way he hadn't in years. "Now," he said quietly, "put your hand flat, fingers together, palm down, like this." He demonstrated. "That's the signal for sit. He's already done it, but let him see it." Ellie mimicked the gesture. Apollo didn't move, didn't need to. But he watched her. His amber eyes locked onto her hand, then her face. "Good," Graham whispered. "Now try stay." He held up a flat palm, held it out like a traffic cop. "Like this." She did. Apollo didn't budge. "He's listening to you," Graham said, astonished. Ellie glanced at him just briefly and then, for the first time, truly smiled. Not wide, not bright, but real. And that's when it happened. A single tear rolled down her cheek, cutting a silent path through the pale of her skin. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't need to. Apollo leaned forward, sniffed her hand, and then gently rested his head in her lap. Like he knew. Like he'd carried pain too, and finally found someone who understood the weight of it without needing words. Graham swallowed hard. He'd seen combat, seen men break, seen dogs refuse food after losing a partner. But this quiet surrender between girl and dog was something deeper. Trust, earned in silence. He stepped back, gave them space. From behind the fence, the others watched. Brutus, Luna, even stoic Zeus. Not barking, not pacing, observing, as if something sacred was unfolding. Ellie looked up at Graham again. This time she lifted her hand slowly and pointed hesitantly toward her chest, then toward Apollo, then toward her mouth, then shook her head. Graham understood. "I can't speak, but he hears me anyway." He knelt beside her, not too close. "You don't need words with them," he said softly. "They don't need fixing. And neither do you." Apollo licked her palm once and settled beside her, tail sweeping gently over the wooden slats. Graham smiled, the corner of his mouth twitching under the weight of things unspoken. He'd trained hundreds of dogs, led missions with canine units in desert cities and snowbound forests. But today felt like the first lesson that truly mattered. That night, as Graham washed Apollo's bowl and turned out the lights in the barn, he caught a glimpse of Ellie's face through the window of her grandparents' house. She was standing behind the curtain, watching him, not afraid, not curious, grateful. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't dared let in. Hope. Ashford slept beneath a silver fog. The frost hadn't yet touched the rooftops, but the cold had settled into the bones of the old houses like a secret. Wind whispered through pine branches. The stars, sharp and merciless, watched over everything. And yet someone was awake. Ellie moved like breath barefoot, quiet, determined. Her flashlight was wrapped in red cellophane to soften the glow. She wore the same oversized coat, sleeves rolled, a battered canvas bag slung across her shoulder. She slipped through the back fence gate like she'd done it a dozen times. Maybe she had. The field was dark, the barn looming like a sleeping giant. But the kennel's silent sentinels lined with straw stirred with recognition as the dogs sensed her presence. No barking, no growling, just movement, shifting paws, curious eyes. Ellie crouched beside the fence and pulled out her notebook. The corners were curled, the pages soft with use. She clicked her pen light on and flipped to the latest entry. Tuesday, 2:13 a.m. Apollo, responsive to shoulder tilts, likes liver treats best. Luna, looks left before sitting, anticipates. Try hand over paw signal. Brutus, sensitive to pace, too fast, equals confusion. New idea, blink timing, ill, release. The pages were filled with diagrams. Dog ears drawn in various angles, eyes sketched like sacred maps. There were timing notations, heartbeat patterns, tiny marks counting seconds between gestures. Words like stillness equals trust, underlined twice in blue ink. Ellie closed the notebook, rose to her feet, and stepped into the circle of faint moonlight. From the kennels, Brutus was the first to rise. Then Luna. Then, one by one, they began to stir, not out of routine, but as if summoned. She pulled a small bag from her coat pocket and crinkled it. Liver treats. Apollo was the first to step forward from the shadows. Ellie didn't flinch. Instead, she took a breath, lifted her hand in a palm-down motion, then lowered it slowly. Her own version of sit. Apollo sat, instantly, willingly. Then Luna, following behind, copied him more from observation than command. Ellie's eyes lit up. She gave Apollo a treat, then Luna. No words, only a glance of approval. She stepped back, raised her right hand slowly, fingers out, and then curved them in a gentle arc toward her chest. A motion she'd made up, something not from Graham's teachings, but from herself. The dogs hesitated, and then astonishingly followed her in a semicircle, sitting at staggered distances like petals around her. Ellie flipped her notebook open again, writing down, "New signal is gather. Like wolves, position equals not dominance. Pack." For a moment she simply stood there, surrounded by breathing warmth and watchful eyes, not commanding, just existing among them. She held up her penlight again, not to shine, but to blink once, then again. A pause. The dogs didn't move, but their attention never wavered. She stepped closer to Apollo, knelt, and slowly offered the flashlight toward his paw. He placed it gently atop the metal cylinder. No pressure, just contact. And then she smiled, soft but fierce, in the way a storm gathers long before the thunder. This was her classroom, the midnight air her chalkboard, her hands the language only they understood. Far off in the house across the yard, a light flickered on brief, then off again. Graham, maybe. But he didn't come out, didn't interrupt. Some part of him must have known this wasn't his moment. Ellie stood again, looked at her page, and sketched a sideways eye. Zeus, he was always watching. Doesn't approach, doesn't interfere, just waits. She turned slowly. And there he was. Zeus, the elder, the one with eyes like ancient stone, sat in the shadows near the far end of the field, not moving, but present. Ellie took one step toward him, paused, then lifted both palms toward the sky, an open gesture, vulnerable. Zeus didn't move, but he blinked once, and Ellie wrote, "Blink is agreement?" The wind picked up, rustling dry leaves along the fence line. She knelt again, whispered something, not a sound, but the shape of it toward the dogs gathered around her. And then, carefully, she packed up her notebook, gave one final signal hand flat over heart, and turned to leave. Apollo followed a few steps. So did Luna. But she lifted her palm, slow and gentle, and they stopped, watched her go. Not because she commanded, because they trusted her to return. By the time she crept back into the house, toes numb and notebook tight in her arms, the horizon had begun its slow transition toward morning. A sliver of rose-gold sky pressed up against the dark. She paused at her window before slipping back into bed. Across the field, through the dark trees and over the rise, just barely visible, the dogs sat where she left them, like guardians carved from breath. The frost had settled hard overnight, painting the wooden rails of the kennels in white lace. Morning came slowly to Ashford, the sun barely pushing past the fog. But for Graham Whitaker, the unease had already begun long before the light touched the treetops. He stood on the porch, mug of coffee cooling in his hand, and watched the field. Something felt off. It wasn't just the silence. It was the pattern of things, or the break in it. The dogs had always greeted the morning with rhythm, Apollo pawing at the gate twice before stretching, Luna darting in her half-circle routine, Brutus rolling once in the straw before standing. Zeus, ever watchful, rising last, and scanning the horizon before the pack moved. But today, Apollo was already standing, ears perked. His focus wasn't on the gate, it was on the house. Specifically, the window above the porch. Graham followed his gaze. Nothing, just glass and a reflection of sky. He frowned. Out in the training field, a tin of treats lay open, half full, its lid left ajar. He hadn't opened it. He never left it out. And yet there it was, beside a notched stick pushed into the dirt, a line drawn around it. Small arcs, almost like a ritual or a signal. Graham walked out across the field, boots crunching the frosted grass, and crouched near the tin. He picked it up, checked inside. Liver treats, some of them nibbled not by dogs, bitten in half, discarded, more like someone testing them. He narrowed his eyes, glanced down, and then he saw it. Footprints. Faint but unmistakable. Too small to be his. Much too small. Each print just barely pressed into the earthlight. Deliberate, almost as if the person had tried not to be noticed. A child. Ellie. He didn't move for a moment. He just stood there, tin in hand, the wind tugging at his jacket, his breath caught between suspicion and something softer. Wonder, maybe. He looked toward the fence where the field met the forest and thought about the nights he'd woken to shadows passing along the property line. The nights Luna paced and Apollo whined without reason, or with reason, and Graham just didn't see it. He returned the tin to the storage bench. The lid clicked into place. That's when he noticed the folded cloth by the corner of the barn, a bandana he hadn't seen in years. Blue, worn, frayed at the ends, kunos. It had gone missing the winter before the fire, and now it was here, folded with care, not windblown or buried, placed. His jaw tightened, a rustle behind him. He turned. No one. But the feeling in his chest, tight, urgent, wasn't just unease now. It was memory pressing too hard against the present. He walked back toward the porch, the dogs following in a loose formation. And then something else happened. He whistled. The usual sharp two-note command for "line up." 7 of them came, but 3 others moved first. They were already lined, in perfect position before he gave the command. And worse, their stance wasn't his. It was different. Shoulders lower, heads tilted slightly inward. The formation bore the structure of obedience, but not from his hand. "Who taught you that?" he muttered. Zeus stared at him, as if he knew. Graham knelt, rested his hand on Brutus's back, and stared at the dust where the prince had vanished into shadow. He wanted to say something, to call someone, to knock on the neighboring house and ask Ellie's grandparents what their girl had been doing in the dead of night. But he didn't. He couldn't. Something stopped him, something deeper than rules or boundaries, a reverence, or fear of breaking what he didn't yet understand. Instead, he walked back to the house, poured out the rest of his coffee, and sat on the steps, staring out at the field with eyes that didn't blink often. That's when the cough started. Sharp, dry, like tearing fabric in his chest. He doubled over slightly, cupping his mouth, waiting for it to pass. It didn't. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the coughing fit racking through him until his ribs ached. When it finally subsided, he sat still for a long time. Then, slowly, he wiped his hand against his pant leg and stared at the red bloom on his palm. Tiny. But there. He looked away quickly, as if shame could erase it. The dogs hadn't moved. Apollo was sitting at the edge of the porch, head tilted, not in confusion, but concern. And for the first time in a long while, Graham felt seen. Not as trainer, not as master, but as something fragile. He cleared his throat and rose, walking inside the house like nothing had happened. That night, he left the porch light on, and in the early hours before the sun returned, he woke to the faint creak of the back gate. He didn't look. He just listened, and let her have the field. The envelope wasn't thick, just a single sheet inside. But Graham stared at it like it was something heavier, like it carried the weight of a guillotine. Official letterhead, Town of Ashford, Department of Zoning and Domestic Safety. He didn't open it on the porch, didn't open it in the kitchen either. He waited until he'd walked to the far end of the property, past the kennels, past the ash tree that still hadn't bloomed since the fire. He stood where Kuno used to patrol the perimeter fence, and only then did he slide a calloused finger under the seal. Effective immediately. In accordance with Ordinance 45B, households exceeding the canine limit must reduce ownership to 3 dogs within 60 days from the date of issue. Failure to comply will result in seizure, fines, and potential criminal charges. He stopped reading. His throat tightened, not with surprise. He'd known it was coming. He could feel it building at the town hall meeting, in the stares of neighbors who used to wave, in the way even the mail carrier refused to cross the front gate anymore. But seeing it ink on paper turned indignation into something colder. 60 days. He folded the letter neatly and tucked it into his coat pocket. The trees stood silent around him. No wind, no bird song, just the kind of stillness that usually came before a storm. Behind him, he heard the shuffle of paws. Apollo. The dog approached slowly, not bounding like usual. His ears weren't perked for play. His entire body was low, taut, as if he too sensed something had changed. "Good boy," Graham muttered, placing a hand on his head. The others began to gather one by one. No command, no whistle, just instinct drawing them toward him like gravity. 14 dogs, 14 hearts, 14 lives that had pulled him back from the brink after Kuno and Evelyn were gone. Now he was being asked to choose 3. 3? Which 3? How do you choose between breath and memory? Between the dog who guards the back porch and the one who sleeps by the door in winter? How do you pick between Apollo's unshakable loyalty and Luna's silent healing? He couldn't. And maybe that's why the rage didn't come. Only weariness. The kind that sits in your chest like wet wool. Heavy, clinging, familiar. Back in the house, he pinned the notice to the corkboard beside a faded photograph of him and Kuno on deployment. Afghanistan. Dust and desert sun. 2 soldiers, one on 2 legs, one on 4, both alive in ways they hadn't been since. The letter looked out of place there. Too sterile. Too final. He sat in the armchair by the window and watched the field. Outside, the dogs moved differently. He noticed it first in Brutus, the way he circled twice before lying down, facing the road instead of the barn. Then in Luna ears, flicking, nose twitching more than usual, even when the wind was still. Even Zeus, the old sentinel, stood longer at the fence line before turning in for the night. They knew. Not the specifics, maybe. Not about the ordnance or the 60-day countdown ticking like a clock in his pocket. But they felt the shift. In him. In the air. And something about that realization both gutted him and steadied him. Because if they felt it, then they'd stand with him, whatever came next. He coughed again, sharp and deep, and wiped his hand on a nearby cloth before anyone human or dog could see. The blood was brighter this time, but he pushed it away, like everything else he didn't have time to face. Apollo appeared at the screen door again, tapping once with his paw. "Let me in." Graham stood slowly and opened it. The dog didn't enter immediately. He just looked up at him, something knowing in those eyes. Not sorrow. Not yet. But ready. The others followed, slipping into the living room one by one, quietly, as if they too understood that the walls of this house had just become a battleground. Not of noise or violence, but of presence. Their bodies were the protest. And for the first time since the letter arrived, Graham allowed himself the smallest flicker of hope. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that screams, "We'll win." But the quiet kind. The kind that endures. He leaned down and whispered to Apollo, his voice almost breaking. "They want to count you, but they'll never understand you." Apollo licked his hand once, then curled at his feet like a vow. The walls of Ashford's only clinic were too white for comfort. They didn't hum with sterile cleanliness the way hospitals in cities did. Here they hummed with familiarity photos of local kids with gap-toothed smiles, thank you notes in crayon, faded posters about flu season from 5 years ago. Graham sat on the exam table, boots still on. The paper beneath him crinkled every time he shifted, which was often. He hated this room. Hated its stillness, the scent of antiseptic and lavender-scented hand soap that reminded him of Evelyn's lotion. Dr. Alina Ramirez, in her early 40s and far too perceptive for his liking, stood across from him with her arms folded. "You've lost weight," she said, not looking at her clipboard, "and your coughing's worse than last winter." "It's the dust," Graham replied, voice gravelly. "Barn insulation's been shedding again." She didn't smile. "Graham, we've done this dance before." He rubbed his chest. The pain wasn't sharp, just ever-present. Like a stone sitting right behind the ribs, shifting slightly every time he breathed too deeply. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Her voice softened but didn't bend. "Let me do a scan. Chest X-ray at the very least. We can rule things out. Or in. Either way, you need to know." He met her eyes then and looked away. Not today. Graham, I've got 14 dogs and 60 days before the town tries to rip them from me, he said, standing. If I'm dying, you'll know soon enough. Her shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in a kind of quiet resignation she probably reserved for old war horses like him. Promise me you'll come back. I've made too many promises already. She didn't try to stop him. Outside, the cold bit into his bones. The sky had turned pewter, clouds low and wide like a ceiling pressing down. He drove straight home. Didn't stop for gas. Didn't stop for coffee. Just pulled into the driveway where Luna and Scout waited at the gate, alert the moment his headlights crested the hill. The house was too quiet, so he lit a fire, then opened the bottom drawer of the old wooden dresser Evelyn used to call her memory box. Inside, worn edges of a life he once lived pressed against his fingers. He pulled out a stack of photographs, yellowed with time and smoke. One by one, he laid them on the floor. A younger version of himself, sunburned and grinning, crouching beside his fire team in Afghanistan. Sand everywhere. Kuno by his side, tongue out, eyes bright. Another, Evelyn in the garden, hands covered in dirt, laughing like she didn't know war could follow someone home. And then the photo that always unraveled him, Kuno asleep at the foot of Evelyn's hospital bed the night before she passed. The nurse had taken it. Graham wasn't even in the room when it was snapped. He'd gone outside to breathe or cry. He couldn't remember which. His hands trembled now. He pressed his knuckles to the edge of the fireplace and let the heat push against the ache in his chest. It wasn't just the town, or the letter, or the failing lungs. It was time. Time unraveling him thread by thread, taking Evelyn first, then Kuno, and now, threatening to strip away what little purpose he had left. The dogs had kept him moving after all that. 1 became 3, 3 became 14. Each one brought to him for different reasons, some abandoned, some broken, some too fierce for families, too gentle for cages. And somehow, they became his second fire team. He stood and walked to the back door. The field stretched out, moonlit and silent. A few of them were still awake. Apollo at his post, Vega by the old ash tree, Luna pacing slowly along the fence line like she was patrolling dreams instead of danger. He stepped outside, breath fogging. The air carried no wind, but the night had that thickness, that quiet hum, like the world was listening. The dogs gathered wordless. No command, no click of tongue, no signal. They just came. Graham sat on the steps, arms resting on his knees. One by one, they surrounded him. Some pressed close, others lay just out of reach, eyes locked on his. "You know," he whispered, voice breaking on the edges, "I lost her in the fall, Kuno a year later. I didn't think I'd survive that second winter." Apollo shifted closer, pressed his head to Graham's knee. He reached down, stroked the coarse fur. "But you all kept the frost out." He looked up at the stars, blinking hard. "I won't lose you too." The words hung there, brittle and bare like glass just before it breaks. The dogs didn't move, didn't bark, just stayed. And in that stillness, Graham didn't feel alone. He felt watched over, as if Kuno were there too. And maybe, in a way, he was. The barn breathed differently at night. By day it was dust and feed, the clang of metal gates, Graham's low commands echoing between the rafters. But at night, the barn became something else entirely, like a cathedral of wood and whispers, where the old world slipped off its boots and let a new one emerge. Ellie knew every creak in the floorboards now, every loose nail, every knot in the timber that looked like a watchful eye. She moved through the dark with a flashlight wrapped in red cellophane, casting a soft crimson glow that didn't startle the dogs or alert the neighbors. Apollo was always the first to meet her, silent, present, waiting at the hayloft stairs, like a sentinel who'd never questioned her right to be there. She gave him a quiet nod, and he fell in beside her, head low, steps in rhythm with hers. In the barn's center, the other dogs were already stirring. They knew the sound of her boots by now. They recognized the scent of the notebook tucked under her arm, the crinkle of treat bags, the way she exhaled before beginning. This was their time. The world outside might have seen a girl who didn't speak, a town ordinance, a countdown. But in here, Ellie was understood. She raised her hand slowly, and the dogs stilled. Then she opened the notebook, its pages crowded with loops and lines, diagrams drawn with a precision beyond her years. Each dog had its own page, weight, quirks, reaction times, even notes on posture and eye movement. She tapped a line she'd drawn just last week. Circle, clockwise. Athena leads. With a low whistle, she pointed left. Athena moved first, graceful even on straw, and the others followed. Scout, Vega, Titan, then Apollo, bringing up the rear. The dogs circled her in unison, paws brushing hay. Ellie stepped backward into the center, raised 2 fingers. The circle expanded slightly. 3 fingers. They stopped. A closed fist. The lie down. They dropped into the straw like synchrony had always been their nature, not something learned in shadows. Ellie's throat tightened, not with emotion exactly, but with the quiet pressure of something like pride or power, not the kind that commands, the kind that connects. She pulled the flashlight from her belt and clicked it twice, her new signal for perimeter scan. Apollo lifted his head instantly. His eyes flicked to the barn doors. Scout turned toward the loft ladder. Titan angled his body toward the feed storage wall, where field mice often stirred. Athena remained by Ellie's side, tail still, eyes forward. Ellie reached down and rested a hand on Athena's broad head. The dog pressed gently into her palm, nuzzling once, then staying. "I see you," it seemed to say. And in return, Ellie didn't need to speak. Her breath steadied. Her shoulders dropped. They ran the drills again, then again. Ellie adjusted the formation staggered instead of symmetrical. She made them sit in pairs, then swap. She added a roll command only 2 dogs knew yet, but they were learning. Always learning. Midway through, she slipped on a patch of hay near the trough. Before she hit the floor, Apollo was there, blocking her fall with his flank. She landed against him, startled, breath knocked loose. He didn't flinch, just waited for her to recover. And when she did, when she sat there in the hay, panting softly with the flashlight askew and her braid half undone, Athena came beside her, pressed her nose gently into Ellie's wrist, and stayed. Ellie didn't cry often, but sometimes the tears came in silence, so soft they felt like part of her breath. And when they did, she let them fall into fur and straw, unburdened. Tonight, there was just one, a single tear sliding down her cheek as she sat in that circle of warmth, of protection, of belonging. Her family had once been 4 people and a golden retriever. Then 1 storm. Then 1 car. And then just Ellie. But now she had a pack. She rose, brushed off the hay, gave the dogs a short series of hand signals, returned to posts, lie low, stay. They obeyed without hesitation. She clicked off the flashlight. The barn dipped back into near darkness, moonlight filtering through the cracks, catching in the dust like stars that had fallen too low. Ellie climbed the loft ladder quietly, notebook pressed to her chest. From the window she could see the shape of Graham's house beyond the tree line. One of its lights was still on. But she didn't worry. She'd be gone before morning, just like always. Down below, Apollo sat beneath the ladder guarding the base. Athena curled in the hay near the door, eyes barely closed, ears twitching at every sound. Together they kept watch. For her, for each other, for whatever was coming. The knock on the gate was too crisp to be neighborly. Graham paused mid-rake, the late afternoon sun bleeding low across the pasture, dogs lounging in patches of light and shade. Apollo rose first, didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood, tail lowered but steady, gaze locked on the figure outside the fence. Dana Fuller, blazer sharp, shoes too clean for the gravel path, clipboard in one hand, badge in the other. She didn't smile, didn't frown either, just assessed. Graham met her at the gate, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice neutral but worn at the edges. "Dana Fuller, Child Protective Services," she said, holding up the ID long enough for it to glint. "We received a report of a minor residing near unsupervised animals and potential health hazards. I'm here for an informal evaluation." A pause passed between them. He unlocked the gate. "Then come on in," he said simply. She walked with a certain stiffness, not fear, not judgment, but calculation. Eyes like instruments. She scanned the fencing as she moved, secure, reinforced, triple-latched. Then the property. Tidy, though clearly lived in. Feed bins labeled, water stations full, logs stacked by month and behavior tags. She crouched beside one. "Behavioral tracking sheets," she said aloud, flipping through. Graham nodded. Color-coded, red for medical flags, blue for temperament, yellow for integration drills. Dana's brow lifted. "Military?" "Once," he said. "Still matters." The dogs kept their distance, but only out of respect. They were calm. Observing her just as she observed them, Dana scribbled something on the clipboard. "You keep records like a therapist, but you're not one." "No, ma'am. Just someone who learned how not to give up on them." "And Ellie?" The name hung heavier than it should have. Graham didn't flinch. "Lives next door. Visits." Dana glanced toward the far property line. "You let a mute child with documented trauma interact with protection-trained dogs?" "She lets herself," he replied. Another scribble. "Does she speak with anyone?" "No words, not yet, but she communicates just fine." Dana exhaled slowly, walking toward the barn. Inside, the training space was as clean as a makeshift clinic. Straw swept, tools hung with care, a whiteboard filled with sketches, timelines, names, dog names. In one corner sat a small folding stool, and beside it a worn notebook with colored tabs, crayons. Dana walked over, eyes narrowing. She picked up the notebook and flipped through a few pages. Diagrams of paw placements, gesture cues, a sketched circle drill. Then she found it, a page labeled Athena. Next to the name, in careful, childlike strokes, was a drawing of Ellie, kneeling in straw, smiling faintly, one hand on Athena's back. Dana stared at it longer than she meant to. "Is this hers?" she asked. Graham nodded. "Does she draw often?" "Only when she thinks no one's watching." Dana's tone changed just slightly. Less edge, more breath. "She's documenting," she said. "Pattern recognition, observation, reinforcement. You realize this could qualify as a therapeutic protocol." "Is that what this visit is about?" he asked, voice low. "Determining whether what we have here fits inside your forms?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around once more. The dogs were settled now. Scout with his head on his paws, Athena curled by the workbench. Not a single bark had sounded since she arrived. Dana lowered her clipboard. "I've been doing this job 15 years, she said, "and I've seen every kind of broken. But I've also seen what makes people fight their way back." She looked at the sketch again. "This doesn't look like fear." Graham said nothing. The wind moved softly through the barn. Finally, Dana tucked the notebook back where she found it. She stepped toward the door, then paused. "I can't endorse this as official therapy," she said, more to the straw than to him. "But I'm also not going to interfere, not yet." She walked to the gate. Graham followed quietly. At the threshold, she turned. 60 days, she said. "You know what that means." He nodded. "I know." Her hand hovered on the latch, then dropped. "She trusts you," Dana said. "You should make sure you're still here for her when it counts." And with that, she was gone. The dogs didn't move until the sound of tires faded into gravel. Then Apollo came to Graham's side and leaned gently into his leg. He rested a hand on the dog's head and exhaled. Still here, for now. The porch light flickered once, then held steady, casting a soft amber glow over the dirt path leading from the woods. Graham sat on the top step, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the fence. The dogs were restless. Apollo paced in wide arcs, ears twitching at every rustle in the wind. Zeus sat like a statue at the edge of the porch, eyes trained on the tree line, as if waiting for a cue that never came. The usual rhythm of the nightlight footsteps, a faint clink of a gate latch, the almost silent entrance of a girl who spoke only in gestures and patience, was absent. No Ellie. Graham checked his watch again. 10:04. She was never this late. He stood, but a sudden tightness caught in his chest. Just a flutter, nothing new, but he sat back down, breathed through it, told himself not to overthink. "She's a kid," he muttered aloud, more to Apollo than himself. "Kids forget. Kids sleep." Apollo didn't look convinced. He gave a low whine, padded over to the fence, then looked back like asking permission to search. "No," Graham said quietly, shaking his head. "Not yet." The wind shifted. Leaves danced across the gravel. The barn creaked softly in the distance. But there were no footsteps, and that absence felt louder than any alarm. Graham rubbed his hands together, the night air cold enough to seep through skin and thought. His mind moved through memories like a filing system. Ellie's silence, her focus, the way her fingers fluttered when she signaled stay or good. The way Athena leaned into her. The way Ellie lingered after drills, as if needing the dogs more than they needed her. And the page in that notebook, the one Dana had seen. Something in her had changed, grown heavier, more urgent. Across the tree line, 2 blocks away, a girl sat cross-legged on the floor of her small room. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Her aunt had fallen asleep early, the kind of sleep that smelled like wine and forgetting. Ellie's lamp was off, but her flashlight was on, covered by a blanket to soften the glow. Her notebook lay open in front of her, pages fanned like wings. She flipped past diagrams, drills, names in block letters, Apollo, Athena, Scout, Ghost, until she reached a blank page. She gripped the pencil tightly. The words came slowly. Not because she couldn't think them, but because they were heavy. "They're going to take them." She stared at it, then underlined it once. "I have to show them." She underlined that twice. Then, in the margin, she began sketching. Circles, arrows, the silent sit cue Graham had shown her, the staggered signal pattern she'd taught herself, an aerial view of the field with the phrase, "full formation, final proof." She paused. Then, beneath it all, in small, careful writing, "They're not just dogs. They're the only ones who ever listened." Her pencil hovered. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't sad, but because there was no space for it. Instead, she flipped to a fresh page and began writing a plan. One that didn't need permission, just courage. Outside her window the wind shifted again, and though no one heard her, Ellie whispered something under her breath. Not a word, just a sound that to the right set of ears might have been a promise. Back at the cabin, Graham stood up slowly. Apollo circled once, then came to his side, resting his head against Graham's thigh. "She's not coming tonight," Graham said. His voice cracked on the last word. Zeus let out a soft huff of air. Not alert, not alarmed, just acknowledgement. Something had shifted. Graham looked to the treetops and whispered as if someone could hear him through the dark. "Whatever you're doing, kid, just don't forget to come back." Janet Reynolds arrived just before noon, her shelter van crunching to a stop on the gravel like it was carrying judgment in the back seat. She stepped out with her clipboard and her usual look of practiced concern. "I brought the new logs and kibble from the volunteer drive," she announced, though her eyes were already scanning the training field behind the house. Graham wiped his hands on a rag and walked over, the sun pressing gently against his shoulders, but not quite warming him. "You're early." Janet raised an eyebrow. "So are your dogs." She gestured toward the field. Graham followed her gaze. Out by the marker cones, 4 of the dogs were moving in a diamond pattern Apollo in front, Scout on his flank, Athena bringing up the rear, with Ghost weaving a silent circle around them. The choreography was smooth, coordinated, but not his. "That's not one of yours, is it?" Janet asked. Graham squinted, pulse skipping. "No," he said slowly. "It's not." Janet jotted a note down, but her tone was light. "Whatever you're doing, they're learning faster than most certified units I've seen." Graham gave a stiff nod, but his mind wasn't on her praise. That wasn't his drill. He never taught that formation, not in that pattern, not with that spacing. He excused himself and walked toward the barn. Inside, the familiar scent of hay, wood shavings, and dog fur wrapped around him. But underneath, something else. Strawberry. He stopped. There it was, faint but unmistakable. That synthetic sweetness only found in the kind of shampoo marketed toward kids. He walked slowly to the far corner, where the grooming kits were stored in crates. Nothing looked out of place. But then he saw it, a small pink bottle, half empty, tucked behind a bale of hay. He picked it up and turned it in his hand. There was a faint smudge on the cap like a child's fingerprint pressed into the dried soap. He didn't smile. Not quite. Instead, something like ache passed over his face. A quiet surrender. It wasn't just that she'd been here. It was how much care she'd brought with her. Not a game, not rebellion. She was washing them, training them, trusting them. She had filled the silence with something he hadn't seen coming, connection, and it wasn't written on any form or log sheet. That evening, as twilight bled into the rafters, Graham walked out to the barn again, alone, save for Apollo trailing behind like a sentry. He stopped by the main gate, unlatching the chain from its hook. His hand rested there for a long moment. Then, without a word, he let it fall back gently, leaving the gate open just enough that it wouldn't click shut. He turned and walked away, not glancing back. Inside the barn, Athena stirred in her sleep, ears twitching. Ghost lifted his head and sniffed the air just once, then settled again. Graham didn't say anything to the dogs that night, but when he reached the porch, he sat in the old wooden chair with the loose armrest and whispered to the wind, "She's earned it." The sun hadn't fully broken the tree line when the first car pulled into the gravel path, then another, then three more. By 8 o'clock a.m., the front of Graham's property looked like a press conference waiting to happen. Except no one smiled. A silver city vehicle creaked to a stop. Donna Fuller emerged, first clipboard hugged tight to her chest, expression unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. Behind her, a tall man in a navy coat adjusted the cuffs of his suit as he surveyed the land like it owed him something. Mayor Riggins. Janet Reynolds stepped out next, her shelter badge pinned sharp on her vest, eyes scanning the dogs already sitting quietly behind their enclosures. 3 CPS officers, a representative from zoning, 2 local reporters. Even Dr. Ramirez had shown up, though she lingered near the back, arms crossed, worry painted into the lines of her face. Inside the house, Graham stared at his own reflection, pale, jaw tight, skin drawn too close to bone. He tucked the bottle of cough suppressants deeper into the drawer and splashed cold water on his face. The tremor in his hands was back. From outside, Apollo gave a single bark. Not alarm. Alert. Graham took a breath. Another. Then stepped onto the porch. He greeted no one. Instead, he walked slowly toward the reinforced kennels, letting them follow him like a silent jury. Apollo walked at his side, posture calm but watchful. "I was told you'd have this place brought to code," Mayor Riggins said as he approached, tone already leaning toward judgment. "Today's the deadline." Graham said nothing at first. He reached for the latch on the first gate and let it open smoothly. Inside, a new stainless steel water system gleamed in the light. Reinforced mesh-welded, not bolted, lined the perimeter. A sound-dampening canopy extended above the space, casting a soft hush even with footsteps shifting on gravel. Graham gestured toward the next unit. "One by one, each pen has been upgraded," he said, his voice rough from fatigue but steady. "Quiet shelters, wind-resistant covers, insulation panels under every bedding slab, no corners to cut." Dana stepped forward, checking items off as she moved. "Training field?" Graham led them to the back. The grass had been recently leveled and bordered with low fencing. Cones marked drills. Targets had been hand-painted onto worn boards. A chalkboard with diagrams stood under a makeshift awning, old but meticulous. "Who taught them that?" Janet asked softly, pointing to a group of dogs that sat perfectly still at the edge of the field, eyes forward, tails still, as if waiting for an unseen command. "Daily drills," Graham answered. "Consistency, familiar signals." He didn't say hers. Didn't mention the late-night sessions, the scent of strawberry in the hay, or the barely visible footprints near the trees. Back by the kennels, one of the CPS officers flipped through Graham's maintenance logs. "No violations since the last visit," he muttered. "Sanitation levels good, vet visits logged, nutrition above standard." Dana raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She walked up to Graham. "And the therapy program?" Graham paused. The word still made him flinch a little, as if calling this connection therapy reduced it to a prescription. "I don't write reports," he said, "but I see the difference." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a photo creased but clean. Ellie, sitting in the field beside Athena. No smile, but her head tilted slightly. One hand on the dog's neck, the other sketching in a notebook. Donna took the photo, looked at it longer than expected. "She hasn't spoken," she said softly. Graham nodded. "But they listened to her anyway." Mayor Riggins cleared his throat. "We're not here to debate sentiment," he snapped. "We're here to determine whether this man has met the legal and safety requirements to maintain possession of 11 high-drive canines on private land zoned for agricultural use." A long pause. Dr. Ramirez finally stepped forward, voice firmer than expected. "With all due respect, Mayor, this man is doing more to keep these animals and that girl balanced and connected than half the systems we pretend are working." Riggins glared. "Is that a professional opinion?" Ramirez didn't blink. "It's a human one." Silence settled, as thick as fog. One by one the others glanced at their notes. At each other. At the dogs watching quietly, breathing in rhythm, as if even they understood something hung in the balance. Graham exhaled, slow. His legs felt weak, but he didn't waver. "I know this isn't how it's supposed to look," he said, turning to face the group. "No white coats, no therapy badges, no quiet offices with two-way mirrors. But they're not just dogs," he continued, voice rough. "They're memory, routine, focus. They fill in where words haven't been for a long time." He looked toward the woods where Ellie sometimes stood. "I don't know how to explain it in your language, but I can tell you this place matters." Mayor Riggins looked to Dana, Dana to Janet, then to the girl in the photo again. She studied it one last moment, then slid it back into Graham's hand. "No decision yet," she said, "but I've seen enough to listen." A gust rolled over the field, stirring the dust and heat into silence. The inspection team had just begun to disperse when the iron gate creaked open, its familiar hinge groaning like a warning. From the far edge of the property, where the woods met the training field, a small figure stepped into view, barely 5 feet tall, threadbare hoodie, fists tight at her sides. Ellie. She didn't look at the adults. Her eyes were fixed ahead, lips pressed into a line of quiet defiance. Apollo saw her first. His ears twitched. He didn't move. Neither did Graham. He froze, mouth parted slightly, as if caught between calling her name or swallowing it whole. "Ellie?" Janet murmured, reaching instinctively for her phone. But something in the air shifted. Ellie raised her hand just a few inches, fingers steady, palm forward. The dogs responded before the adults could blink. 11 German shepherds broke from their kennels in perfect synchrony, not in chaos, not in aggression. Formation. They moved with a quiet grace, as if drawn by unseen wire. Spaced perfectly equal distance between bodies, tails low, eyes alert. Within seconds, they had encircled the girl. A ring of stillness. Guardians, not guards. The wind dropped. Apollo took his place behind her. Athena lay down at her right side, head nudging her hip with a softness that didn't belong to trained command, but to memory. Ellie stood at the center like a compass needle. breathing, and the world held its breath with her. "Graham, do something," Mayor Riggins hissed, but even his voice faltered. Janet had lowered her phone. She was watching the dogs, but more than that, watching Ellie. The girl's shoulders trembled slightly, but not from fear. It was control, quiet strain, like holding a violin note at the edge of breaking. "Circle," Ellie said. The word was barely audible, but the dogs heard it. Their positions shifted, every head angled outward, tail still, muscles poised. It was a defensive perimeter, tactical, not cute. Dana Fuller stepped forward cautiously. "Where did she learn that?" No one answered. Graham was still staring. Something behind his ribs clenched, painfully tight. He hadn't taught them that, but she had. Without manuals, without a word of praise, just presence, persistence, pattern. And now, in front of everyone who came to judge her silence and his survival, she was speaking, without sound, without permission, and being heard. Athena stood slowly and nudged Ellie again. This time the girl kneeled. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper from her coat pocket, creased and worn. She handed it to Dana. Dana hesitated before taking it. A sketch. No, a map. The property. Dog positions, symbols for movement, call signs, response patterns. It looked like something pulled from a handler's playbook, except in the margin, written in pencil and shaky cursive, "I learn by watching. I speak through them." Dana looked up. Her eyes had softened. Not pity, but awe. Janet stepped beside her, whispering under her breath, "That's not just instinct. That's imprinting. These dogs know her." The moment cracked. A bird called from the woods. The dogs slowly began to relax, but never broke their formation, never left her side. Mayor Riggins took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose like trying to erase something too big to control. This isn't protocol," he muttered. "You're right," Graham said finally, voice rough. "It's not." He walked forward slower than usual, chest tight, limbs reluctant. When he reached Ellie, she didn't flinch, just looked up, eyes wide and waiting. He crouched beside her, gently placed a hand on Athena's back. "You scared the hell out of me, kid." Ellie blinked once, then just barely. Her hand brushed his. The inspection team had no more clipboards to shield themselves with. Dana glanced at the others, then down at the paper again. "She's not just bonded with them," she said softly. "She's structured them, grounded them." "They're family," Graham said. "Same as she is." No one argued, not even Riggins. For once the silence spoke for everyone. The wind shifted again, but this time it wasn't the trees or the grass that moved first. It was Ellie. She remained in the center of the circle, dogs surrounding her like sentinels made of breath and instinct. Her hand raised, palm rotating slightly, just enough for Apollo to fall into a sit, Athena to lower to a crouch, the rest adjusting, like ripples tightening in a still lake. Silent choreography. Precision born not of force, but familiarity. "Down," she mouthed. They obeyed in a fluid wave. "Shift." The outer ring stepped clockwise, just one pivot. Zeus scanned the tree line. "Perimeter lock." Each dog froze, head out, body coiled, not aggressive but present. Alive with purpose. The humans were forgotten for a moment. Everyone on that field was merely witness to something older than law, deeper than training. A communion of girl and dog and silence. Until it broke. Until Graham staggered. It started with a cough, stifled too long. Then a sharp intake of air one that didn't finish. His hand reached for his chest before he even knew what was happening. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a grunt, then a groan. Then the world tipped sideways. Graham collapsed to his knees, face pale as bark ash, breath coming in short, desperate stabs. "Graham!" Janet shouted. "No, don't!" Ellie screamed, her voice raw, real, echoing across the field like something ancient breaking free. Everyone froze, but the dogs didn't. Zeus was already moving. The massive sable shepherd sprinted to Graham, sniffed once, then reared up on his hind legs and began pumping rhythmically against the old man's chest. Chest compressions. 2 pumps. Pause. 2 more. Tail rigid. Eyes locked on Ellie for feedback. Luna dashed from the far side, her silver coat flashing in the sun. She darted toward the barn and returned within seconds, a small white bottle clenched in her teeth. Ellie ran forward and took it from her. Graham's hand trembled as Ellie pressed the nitroglycerin to his lips. "Breathe," she whispered. "Breathe now, old man. Please." The mayor stood rooted, mouth slightly agape. Dana Fuller reached for her radio, then stopped halfway. Janet had tears in her eyes. "She taught them," she whispered. "She trained them herself." Graham coughed again, weakly this time, but something loosened in his chest. His fingers curled slowly into the soil, gripping the earth like a rope thrown to a drowning man. His eyes opened just barely, and he saw her, Ellie, kneeling beside him, both hands on his. Not silent, not scared, present, alive. "They're mine too," she said, louder now. Her voice cracked but didn't fall apart. "I taught them." She looked up, not at Graham, but at everyone. Dana, Janet, even the mayor. "They're not just his dogs. They're my voice." A pause. Then quieter, like an echo folded in paper. "They speak when I can't." The dogs didn't break formation, but their ears had turned one by one toward the sound of her voice. Recognition. Like hearing the final note of a song they'd been trained to play, but never allowed to finish. Graham groaned again, but the pain was receding, not gone, just softened, diluted by presence. Ellie pressed her forehead to his temple, eyes squeezed shut. "I won't lose you," she whispered. "I won't lose you, too." Apollo leaned into them both, not as a soldier, but as family. No one spoke for a long time. Zeus stood guard at Graham's side, chest rising and falling like a practiced tide. The bottle of nitroglycerin lay in the grass, its label faded but still legible. Janet was the first to kneel. Dana followed. Then finally the mayor removed his hat. Somewhere between breath and memory, between silence and scream, a voice had returned, and the dogs had listened first. It was the beeping that anchored him, not the antiseptic air, not the scratch of linen against skin, nor even the faint ache thudding beneath his ribs, but the steady mechanical rhythm beside his ear. Alive. Graham stirred beneath the hospital sheet. Every joint argued, every breath still came with weight, but his eyes opened. Not all the way, just enough. And there she was, Ellie, sitting in the corner chair like she'd been carved into it. Hoodie zipped to her chin, arms curled around a notebook battered from the weather, from time. She wasn't drawing, just holding it, as if its weight had meaning. Her eyes found his, and slowly, slow enough to break something soft in his chest, She smiled. "You kept your promise," she said. The words sat there, full and unafraid. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a raspy croak. He coughed, winced, then let the air settle. Ellie reached forward, unscrewing the cap from a water bottle and holding it steady as he drank. Graham looked at her. At the girl who had once gone days without saying a word, who used to only speak in half-sketches and unspoken rhythms. Now sitting beside him like she'd never left, like she'd grown into her voice and carried his name with it. His hand found hers on the edge of the blanket. He squeezed. She squeezed back. Later that afternoon, the door creaked open gently. Martha stepped in, hair windblown, purse slung over one shoulder like she'd driven straight from the farmer's market and forgotten the world outside. She saw Graham, paused. Then her eyes drifted to Ellie, then to the photograph in her hand. She crossed the room, slower now. No words yet. Finally she held out the photo. "Found this in an old box," she said, voice quieter than usual. "Under Ellie's baby blanket. Thought it was junk. Until today." Graham took it. His hand trembled. Not from weakness, but recognition. The image had yellowed, edges curled like the corners of old maps. But the faces were clear. A younger, hair thick, smile unsure stood between two other figures. Ellie's father and Ellie's mother. All three in fatigues, arms slung over each other's shoulders, dust in their boots, a desert sun at their backs. Graham blinked once, twice, then looked at Ellie again. No wonder, no disbelief, only a quiet filling in the blanks. "You knew them," Martha said. "Didn't you?" "I did," Graham rasped. "They saved my life." He looked at Ellie again. "And now she's done it too." Silence fell. But it wasn't empty. It was full. Of stories not yet told. Of promises kept and broken and mended in the folds of memory. Ellie reached into her notebook and flipped to a page he hadn't seen. It wasn't a drawing this time. It was a list. Simple bullet points. One by one. Don't let them take the dogs. Show them the signal drills. Zeus, chest compressions. Luna, med kit. Stay calm. Keep your promise. At the bottom, scrawled in uneven, careful block letters, "If he forgets, help him remember he's family." Graham's hand reached toward the page, then gently closed the notebook. His voice was little more than a breath now. "I remember." The sun had started to dip behind the hills, softening the edges of the world outside the hospital window. Warm amber spilled across the bed where Graham lay propped up, a blanket over his knees, Ellie curled on the armchair nearby, asleep at last. He didn't wake her. Didn't need to. She'd already heard the hard parts, though not the whole. He waited until Martha returned, a styrofoam coffee cup in one hand, her steps quieter than before. When she sat beside him again, he nodded toward the door. "I need to say something," he said. She stilled. "You sure?" Graham nodded. She looked at Ellie, then gently stepped into the hallway, leaving the door cracked. Graham looked at the girl across from him, head tilted to one side, dark hair fallen over her face, the faint trace of dirt still under her nails from yesterday's drills. "You don't remember," he began, voice low like an ember refusing to go out. "But I was there." He swallowed hard. "I was the first to the crash." He didn't describe the flames, didn't need to, didn't tell her how the windshield had folded like paper or how the smell of scorched rubber clung to his jacket for weeks. He didn't explain what it felt like to reach into a smoking wreck and find a baby seat still upright, still warm. He just closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. Your mom was still conscious. Barely. She knew your dad was gone before I did. He let the silence settle, let it weigh the room like fog. She looked at me, Ellie, right in the eyes. And she didn't ask for anything. A breath. She ordered me. His lips curled faintly at the memory, not of amusement, but of awe. She said, "Don't leave her. Promise me. She's stronger than she looks, but she won't say it. Promise me you'll see her through the storm." His hand reached for hers, still resting on her notebook. I told her yes. Right there, with her blood on my gloves and your cry in the trees. He looked away, through the glass, toward something that wasn't there anymore. I didn't mean to wait this long. The words cracked in his throat. But I didn't know where you ended up. System lost track of you after the second foster. I only found out when Martha brought you to that meeting last fall. His chest ached. Not from the surgery, not from the strain, from the years between. I bought the land 10 years ago, kept the barn up, built the kennels, trained dogs who didn't have a place because maybe someday someone like you would come back. He looked at her again. You did. Ellie stirred in her sleep. Maybe not fully awake, but her fingers moved, curling gently around the notebook's spine. Graham smiled faintly. She never left you, kid? Not really. You've got her grit, his calm, and something that's just you. He leaned back against the pillows, letting the words hang in the gold light. I made her a promise in the ash. He looked at Ellie, then closed his eyes. And I'm going to keep it, however long I've got left. The light in the hospital hallway was muted now, filtered through the half-closed blinds as dusk painted shadows on the walls. Ellie sat by the window in the family waiting room, knees pulled to her chest, her notebook resting unopened on her lap. She wasn't writing anymore. She was remembering. The kind of memory that doesn't come like a photograph, but like warmth, faint at first, then impossible to ignore. Snow, thick and heavy. A car flipped on its side. A woman's voice, raspy but calm. Her name is Ellie. A man's coat thrown around her small shoulders, the crunch of boots, a flashlight beam cutting through the storm. Ellie blinked. Her fingers pressed against her temples, as if trying to hold the pieces still. She remembered the way the man had knelt beside her, the softness in his voice, not asking questions, just being there. His hand had trembled slightly when it tucked the blanket around her. That same tremble was in Graham's hand now. She turned as the door opened. Dana Fuller stood in the threshold, clipboard in one hand, coat draped over the other arm. Her posture, always upright, seemed slightly off tonight, like the weight of bureaucracy didn't sit quite right on her anymore. "I heard he's stable," she said softly. Ellie nodded but didn't speak. Dana stepped inside, glanced at the notebook, then sat across from her, not quite sure how to begin. "Your grandmother told me you spoke yesterday when it happened." Ellie didn't look up. She just whispered, "I remembered." A pause. Dana tilted her head. "Remembered what?" Ellie turned the notebook around, flipping to a page she hadn't shown anyone. A drawing rough, charcoal smudged, childlike but intentional. A circle of dogs, a flashlight beam, a broken road in the snow. That night, the crash. "He was there," she murmured. I didn't know who he was, not for years. But something about the way the dogs listened to me, it always felt like they already knew me. Dana blinked. You think the dogs remember? Ellie finally looked at her. Steady. Not a child grasping for meaning, just someone finally uncovering it. I don't think. I know. She let the silence build, like she'd seen Graham do, never rushing, always letting people arrive at the truth on their own. Then Ellie said, That's why the dogs listen to me, her voice barely above breath. They remember too. Dana stared at the drawing again, then at the girl in front of her. All her training, the legal codes, the licensing frameworks, the protocols flashed across her mind like a filing cabinet knocked open. But nothing in her manuals accounted for this. Nothing prepared her for a child using rescue drills as therapy, for dogs sinking to silent gestures, for a man with a failing heart keeping 11 animals and a promise alive. Dana exhaled slowly. Her hand hovered over the folder at her side. Inside it was the official order of removal signed, sealed, waiting for a timestamp. But she didn't open it. She slid the folder under her coat, stood up, and leaned down just enough for Ellie to hear. I won't file the removal order. She turned to go, but hesitated. You're not just helping those dogs, Dana said, her voice softer than Ellie had ever heard it. You're proving something the system forgot. Healing doesn't always come from paper. She left without another word. Ellie didn't smile. She simply looked back at her drawing and added a new line of text beneath the circle. Memory doesn't fade, it waits. The folding chairs screeched as the town hall filled. Same walls, same faces. But this time the tension had shifted from suspicion to anticipation. Graham sat near the back, pale but upright. Ellie beside him, notebook clutched tight. Martha sat stiffly in her courtroom cardigan. Tonight felt like both, trial and farewell. Mayor Whitlock cleared his throat. Footage has been submitted regarding the Crescent Creek Sanctuary repeal. The projector flickered on. It started in silence. Then Ellie's hand rose palm out. A circle formed. 11 dogs. Still. Steady. Her gestures flowed down. Perimeter. They obeyed like breath, not command. Officer Lee's voice echoed. She's not commanding them. She's inviting them. Gasps rippled. A councilwoman whispered, That's not obedience. That's trust. Then, Graham clutching his chest, Zeus pounding, Luna fetching medicine. The room fell breathless. A sniffle broke the silence. Alan Bixby stood. I misjudged, he said, eyes on Ellie. That wasn't danger. That was devotion. Janet rose. They didn't need a facility. They needed her. Whitlock hesitated. This isn't just about dog ownership. It's liability. Precedent. Officer Lee stood. No notes. Just truth. A girl trained 11 dogs to save a man's life while we debated if he was worth the risk. He paused. In 30 years, I've never seen dogs respond to silence like that. The vote came fast. 3, yes. 1 abstain. 1 whispered apology. Sanctuary official. The dogs could stay. Outside, the night air was cold, but Ellie exhaled. They're staying, she said. Graham chuckled. Told you they'd come around? She didn't smile, just handed him a folded drawing. A house, 11 dogs, and 1 girl, hands raised, not in fear, but welcome. The truck rolled up the drive. Zeus barked once. Apollo whined. Graham was coming home. 2 volunteers eased his chair onto the porch. The ramp was new raw pine, still fresh. "You know," he muttered, "I always thought I'd die before someone built me a ramp." Janet smirked. "You almost did." That morning, people came. Teens once caught trespassing now installed feeders. Officials brought supplies. Even the zoning officer came with a heater. Graham said little. He sat wrapped in a blanket, hand resting on Zeus. The initials carved into his chair, MC, his late wife's mark. Around noon, the mayor arrived. He handed Graham a wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. Unwrapped, Guardians of Ashford Hill, in honor of Graham Cole. 11 shepherds, 1 girl at the center. Ellie traced the grain. "I love it," she whispered. The yard stilled. Even the wind seemed to listen. That afternoon, they mounted the sign. Zeus watched from the porch. Luna curled by the ramp. Graham sat silently. Janet leaned beside him. "You didn't just build a rescue," she said. He nodded. "I gave them back what the world took." "What's that?" He looked at Ellie guiding dogs beyond the fence. Belonging. By sunset, the field was quiet. Ellie sat beside Graham. She opened her notebook to a sketch rough but clear. A hill, 11 dogs, a sign. "You drew this before today?" Ellie nodded. "I saw it." He didn't ask how. He didn't need to. Some things are built not with hammers, but with trust. Morning shimmered with dew. In the field, Ellie stood, boots planted, jacket zipped, notebook in arm, her voice calm. "Circle." The dogs obeyed. Hold. Stillness. Eyes. 11 heads lifted. From the porch, Graham watched. This wasn't command. It was communion. Every morning Ellie arrived before sunrise. Fed the shy dogs first. Opened her notebook on the stone bench. Inside, sketches, symbols, systems. But not about dominance, about empathy. "The Guardian's Code isn't for dogs," she told Janet. "It's for us, to be worthy of them." Within 2 weeks, the town returned, not to shut her down, but to learn. Interns from the shelter, officers modeling future K-9 programs, a therapy center asking for guidance. Graham just watched. On the porch swing, Martha had restained. Sometimes Janet joined him. Neither spoke much. "She doesn't even know what she's doing," he whispered once. "She's leading." That afternoon, Ellie ran a new drill. Noise, distraction, temptation. She pointed at Zeus. He bolted, dodged a thrown treat, circled back on signal. The other dogs howled, not barking, howling, like wolves in moonlight. She raised her arms. Silence. Graham choked up. Tears, not of grief, of release. Janet touched his sleeve. "You okay?" He shook his head. "I thought I failed her," he whispered. "I couldn't save her parents. I thought staying would make it worse." He looked again. She was laughing free in full mud on her knees, surrounded by joy. "I built this for them," he said. Janet smiled. "Maybe you did, but she made it hers." That night, Ellie sat by the fire pit. The dogs behind her, stars in orbit. She flipped to a blank page in the Guardian's Code and wrote, "We do not lead them. We stand beside them." She underlined it once, and across the yard, Graham whispered into the dark, "That's my girl." The sun moved slower that evening. Graham sat at the old desk by the window, folding the last page of a letter. Outside, the dogs waited, not asleep, just still, as if they sensed what was coming. He slid the page into a cream envelope, thick, embossed. On the front, Ellie. Underneath, "Do not open until I'm gone." His breath came short, but he wasn't sad, just full. Full the way peace feels when it finally arrives, wreckage and beauty side by side. He sealed the letter and whispered, "Done." Then she appeared. Ellie stood in the doorway, backlit by sunset. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Graham handed her the envelope. She read the line beneath her name, "Do not open until I'm gone," and said simply, "Okay," like a knot tied around a promise. They sat on the porch together, Graham wrapped in a blanket, Ellie at his feet, the letter in her lap. The sky turned pink, then gold, then blue again. A breeze stirred the edge of the Guardian's code, still open beside her, full of her handwriting and the names of dogs that had learned to trust again. "You rewrote the world, kid," Graham murmured. She didn't answer, just leaned into his leg. No words left, only the silence that love sometimes chooses instead. The stars appeared, and when the last sliver of sun dipped below the hills, Graham closed his eyes. Not from fear, just to listen. To the breath beside him, to the peace he'd spent a life protecting, to the promise, this time, he'd kept. The world didn't end with a siren, it ended with stillness. Ellie found him at dawn. She hadn't meant to check, she just knew. He sat, just as he had, blanket tucked, hand curled on the armrest. The dogs were already there, not barking, not moving, just keeping vigil. Zeus had laid his head across Graham's knee and hadn't moved. Ellie whispered, "Graham?" No answer. She reached for his hand. Cold, not cruel, just gone. She knelt beside him, resting her forehead on his sleeve. Not crying, not yet. The truth had arrived before the tears. Then she saw the envelope tucked beneath the blanket. Her name? "Do not open until I'm gone." Her hand shook as she opened it. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I guess I finally stopped talking long enough to let someone else lead. About time. You don't need me to tell you what you already are. But I will. You are not just part of the pack. You're the reason it works. You turned a barn full of broken dogs into a team. You turned a haunted man into a promise kept. You did it without shouting, just presence. That's leadership. You don't need permission. You already have their trust. The Guardian's code belongs to you now. You are the Guardian now. Take care of them. Let them care for you too. And if the wind shifts just right and you smell pine and smoke, don't be scared. That's just me, checking in. I'm proud of you, kid. Always. G. She folded the letter to her chest. Didn't sob, just closed her eyes. The dogs rose. Apollo to her right, Zeus to her left, Luna behind. A silent circle formed, and as sunlight touched the hills, Ellie breathed in, not as a runaway, but as the leader of the pack. They buried Graham under the oak he'd planted the year Ellie was born. The marker, sanded wood, hand-burned letters. Graham Cole friend, first responder, keeper of promises. At its base, a collar, not for a dog, his. The town came. Not just the changed hearts, all of them, the mayor, Dana, Martha, even the boys who once mocked the barn stood still, hats in hand. The dogs lined up too, not commanded, just present. Zeus stood at the center, eyes on the casket, as if he knew. Ellie stepped to the podium Graham once built for trivia nights. She held her notebook not as shield but torch. "I used to write everything down," she began, afraid to speak, letting the dog speak for her, letting Graham translate. But he didn't just train dogs. He trained people. She looked toward Martha. He kept his promise. She stepped down, placed the notebook on the casket, and said, "Now it's my turn." No applause, just a breath released across the crowd, like a knot had finally loosened. After the service, no one rushed. Dana handed her a rescindment paper. "Not just withdrawn," she said. "Erased." Janet whispered, "You gave us something to believe in." Martha placed a whistle on Ellie's wrist. "Graham's." "Just in case," she said, "but I don't think you'll need it." As dusk fell, Ellie opened the barn gate. The dogs entered in silence, took their places. She stood in the center, her voice steady. "Guardians, rest." They obeyed. But even in rest, their eyes stayed on her, not because she demanded, but because she had listened and loved with a quiet that never needed to shout. 1 year later, spring came early to Ashford Hill. The gravel road now curved toward a new sign, the Legacy Center Animal Therapy and Healing for Kids, in memory of Graham Cole. The barn had transformed, whitewashed, roof renewed, porch wrapped with swings made from old beams. Inside, bean bags, drawings taped to skylights, and the scent of lavender and cornbread. But the change lived in the sound, laughter, real, and barks joyful, curious, gentle. The barn breathed again. Ellie stood in the paddock flanked by 6 kids and 4 dogs. Her voice rang clear. "Breathe with your dog, 3 in, 3 out." A boy named Milo 8, foster care, silent for months, giggled when Bingo the mutt licked his chin. Ellie smiled. "That's progress." From the porch, Martha watched, sweet tea trembling in her hand, not from age, from awe. Officer Lee sat beside her. "She's got it, huh?" Martha nodded. "She is it." Inside the barn, photos lined the walls. Zeus, Echo, Titan, Max. Not bios, just truths. They weren't born brave. They just stayed. In the atrium, a notebook sat in a glass case. The Guardian's Code, by Ellie M. Cole. Visitors paused. Some cried. Out near the fence, a girl named Talia 10, cancer survivor, rested her hand on a one-eyed dog named Birch. "Don't focus on what he was," Ellie whispered. "Focus on what he becomes when you're near." Birch curled beside the girl. Trust answered. That evening, Ellie stood near the ring. Zeus, graying and slow, rested beside her. "Still with me?" she whispered. His tail thumped. Children waved as they left. One handed her a crayon drawing. "Thank you for the safe place." Graham's old porch chair sat untouched, but never empty. A child left a daffodil and a note. "Dear Mr. Graham, I wasn't born when you were alive, but I think you'd like my dog. His name is Jupiter. He's scared of stairs, but not of me." Ellie turned toward the hills. The barn behind her bore a carving. "You kept your promise. Now it's my turn." Below it, in fresh ink, "She did." The sun was soft that morning. 14 shepherds lay near the gates, coats silvered by time, eyes unchanged. They didn't run. They didn't need to. They had already done enough. Ellie knelt beside them, whispering, "They don't move unless you ask. Sometimes, Not even then. The kids giggled. She wasn't joking. Trust doesn't mean obedience, she said, laying a hand on Rook's back. It means time and silence. Even Milo sat still, hand on Valor's side. Then came the shift. Birch rose, padded over to a girl who hadn't spoken. He curled beside her, nudged her elbow. She smiled, then cried. No one rushed to stop it. They stayed with her. From the porch, Martha watched. She no longer supervised. She came to remember. Lee sipped from Graham's old thermos. Ever think we'd see the day? Martha smiled. I used to think strength meant talking. Ellie taught me better. That afternoon, Ellie walked the edge of the field. The shepherds followed, not out of command, but choice. They moved like shadows. Sacred echoes. She stopped near a rock marked only by a paw print and initials, GC. She tucked a note beneath it. Still leading, just like you said. Miss Ellie? A child called. Why do they stay if they're old? She turned. Because they know what home is. As the sun began to set, Ellie stood near the pasture's edge. Luna, youngest, scarred, once feral, sat beside her. She wore no vest. She didn't need one. The clipboard in Ellie's arms held schedules, checklists, diagrams, but scrawled in the margin, trust is quiet, loyalty isn't trained, it's returned. GC Ellie placed a hand on Luna's back. They gave me a voice, she said softly, when the world thought I'd never speak again. She turned toward the barn. Laughter drifted from the therapy barn. Children sweeping hay. One boy waved, leading Dakota through agility cones. That same boy once couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Now, he led. Not every scar could be seen. Not every voice needed words. Ellie crouched beside Luna. The old dog rested her chin on Ellie's knee. At the edge of the field, the shapes of 14 dogs shimmered in the haze ghosts, not of loss, but memory. Carriers of children, guardians of silence, witnesses to a girl who found her strength. Gone, but never absent. The wind tugged Ellie's braid. She stood, and then a bark, clear, soft, unmistakable. Luna stood. Ellie didn't ask why. She already knew. She turned toward the barn, toward the children, toward tomorrow. Let's go home, she whispered. The sun dipped behind the ridge, and for a moment, just long enough, a figure appeared on the horizon. A man. A porch, surrounded by dogs. Then gently, he was gone, and in the hush that followed, only one thing remained. A bark, a heartbeat, a promise kept, fade to black. In a world often loud with distraction and indifference, stories like Ellie's remind us where the quiet power truly lies. In loyalty, in second chances, and in the unconditional love of animals, especially dogs like the noble German shepherds. These dogs are more than protectors or helpers. They are keepers of memory, guardians of the human spirit, and reflections of the love we dare to give. From silent bonds formed in snow to legacies built on healing, the journey of Graham, Ellie, and the shepherds shows us that strength isn't always in the bark. It's in the watchful eyes, the patient presence, and the silent promise to never give up on someone. Let us carry forward the message this story leaves behind, that even the most broken souls can rebuild when given trust, that leadership can grow from gentleness, and that love, pure, unwavering love, can leave paw prints that never fade. May we honor the animals who save us in ways words cannot express, and may we become better humans, not just by their side, but because of them.